read a quote attributed to you in Canadian Dimension in 2008. I am an ardent supporter of Israel in all situations and in all circumstances. First of all, were you quoted accurately? And if so, is that still the case today?
I never give an interview to Canadian Dimensions that I know of, and I do know of a quote in French that might be a
well, it was, yeah, je suis un ardent supporter des toutes les instances
I'm also an ardent supporter of the creation of
d'Israël. That's the French quote.
I'm also an ardent supporter of the creation of a Palestinian state. That's always been the NDP's position, that we should create a state for Palestinians and we should have a state for Israelis. Classic two-state solution. Our actual formulation is that that should be within a framework of international law and UN resolutions. So on the international law side, we know that the current settlement policies, for example, goes against the Fourth Geneva Convention. So that's something very clear in the NDP position, which has always been my position.
So you don't support the settlements?
No, it's a clear violation of the Fourth UN Convention. So you can't say you're in favor of international law.
Well, that doesn't sound like you're an ardent supporter of Israel in all situations and in all circumstances.
But of course, there's no contradiction between the two. You can be an ardent supporter of a country and say that something that they're doing in that case has to be changed, but doesn't mean you're not a supporter of the country. You have to be very careful what those words mean. What I'm saying is I'm not going to use my opposition to something that they're doing as an excuse to call for an end to the state of Israel, which is what some of the adversaries of Israel do. They'll point to one thing and therefore call for the elimination of the state of Israel. Never again. That's been tried before. The state of Israel is here to stay. It deserves our support. It's a democracy, and there are problems that are clearly identified that have to be dealt with. When we talk about doing it within a framework of UN resolutions, that would include 282, which requires the return of lands taken in the '67 war. That's also going to be part of the peace process. A little bit like President Obama, I believe that there will be, in any settlement, there will be swaps. That's the only logical way to get out of the current situation. So people who believe in peace will work for peace. People who believe in continued conflict will keep pointing to the difficulties that do indeed exist and say, that's why Israel has to be gotten rid of. That's the difference between me and them.
And how concerned are you that Egypt may rip up its peace agreement? A new government in Egypt, say Muslim Brotherhood with support from Salafists, may tear up the peace agreement with Israel.
Well, I'm very concerned to see, for example, that the Israeli embassy has had to move into a hotel because it could no longer be provided security in its former quarters. I'm very concerned that the Egyptian army had to be given permission to go against the Sadat Begin peace accords, the Camp David Accords, to be allowed to bring in even more troops into the Sinai, because it's the only way to start providing some sort of security on that rather long border. So we're in a very uncertain time with regard to a lot of the countries in the Middle East. That's why it's important to continue to support the democracies that are there and the ones that are doing well, because unfortunately, despite the hope generated by the Arab Spring, we're seeing that a lot of those countries are backsliding. The same jails are being used, unfortunately, to torture people. It's just a different group of torturers and a different group of people being tortured.
And one of the, during the campaign, Paul Dewar made a very strong statement that he opposed any attack on Iran. Do you have any position with regard to...
I've never met anyone in favor of an attack on Iran. I've never met anyone openly in favor of more war in the world. It's my number one priority in terms of international relations, is to work hard for peace. I don't think that anyone who's looked at this situation objectively is in favor of a preemptive strike on Iran. Cooler heads are prevailing in London, in Paris, and in Washington so far, and I hope that continues. If we want to understand that we have the need for peace, if we're willing to understand that that's the top priority, we work towards it. Ahmadinejad's regime is not going to be there forever. It's a very shaky regime, but the best way to make people coalesce and support a regime is to attack it. It's a history of a country that's been there for thousands of years, strong cultural traditions, people who've been through a lot in the past decades, and I don't think that we should measure a single event. If there were any evidence that there was a real threat to world peace by the development of ballistic missiles that could have been combined with a weapon that was actually there, that would be one thing. But what we're seeing is that the sanctions are starting to work. They are producing the result, and that would be by far the preferred method to continue. I don't know of any, I've never heard anybody calling for a preemptive strike on Iran in this country anyway.
The last question I'll ask you is about the robocalls.
Yeah.
Where do you see this situation going?
One of the problems with all opposition parties over the years is a strong tendency to maybe cry wolf or play chicken little, use whichever image you want, but to affirm that the government sitting opposite is absolutely the worst thing in the history of the country. It's true. The Conservatives show no respect for the fundamental institutions of our democracy, are doing everything to break the parliamentary institutions of our democracy. They cheated on the previous elections with an in and out scheme that they had put together, which was declared by the courts to be illegal. The people who put together that scheme and carried it out are sitting in the Senate today as Conservative senators. The robocalls, think that through. You know, unfortunately, even the term tends to make light of it. It sounds like a kid's game. Think that through. Conservative agents paid to phone people in their homes, to send them miles and miles away to another polling station, personating officers of Elections Canada to break an election result and produce a different result. That's a breakdown of democracy, it's a breakdown of law, and it's something extremely serious. The facile, goofball answers that they keep putting up in the House are pathetic. I'm reassured nonetheless to hear that the Director General of Elections is working very hard on the case. I'm expecting prosecutions. But the trouble with the
use the phrase personation, which is a criminal code offense.
Well, I mean,
is that what you're saying?
If you're phoning and you're saying, I am an officer of Elections Canada, your polling station has been changed. You are impersonating that officer. You're saying, I am that person. So I mean, that's what's on the table right now. So, you know, the Conservatives denied the in and out scandal until they were convicted in court. They threw mud at the Director General of Elections and said, oh, he was biased and he was in favor of the Liberals and he was just picking on them because everybody did this stuff. They're the only ones who ever did it. They have a whole series of talking points about this stuff. They'll point at us, they'll point at the Liberals, they point at everybody else. There's only one party in the House of Commons being investigated for this. It's the Conservatives. So we have to get away from this idea of listening to their talking points and just concentrate on what they did. Phoning people, claiming that you're an officer of Elections Canada, telling them to go kilometers and miles away from their homes so that you will discourage them from voting or make it impossible to vote because it'll be after the hours. That's what this is about. That's a fundamental breach in our society.
So is anyone involved in this? Because under the Charter, you know, Section 3 gives us our democratic rights. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity, and you've taught law, whether there's an opportunity to vote for voters or a lawyer to organize a class action suit against those who are responsible.
That's a possibility, but that's something that would take itself far too long to wend its way through the courts.
So wouldn't it offer opportunities for disclosure if Elections Canada isn't being transparent?
I'm going to stay convinced that the same way that Elections Canada was able to get a conviction against the Conservatives for the in and out scandal, that they're going to be capable of proving what's on the table so far, but proving it in a court of law, not just in the court of public opinion. But beyond that, what we're seeing is repeat behavior by the Conservatives, where they believe that, in their view, they're serving a higher purpose, that they're allowed to cheat. That is the essence of the Conservatives. They believe that they're allowed to cheat on elections, and once they win, then they just stand somebody up in the House to give these ridiculous answers that they prepare as talking points. That's the fundamental thing. That's what we have to work on.
How high does it go?
I don't know. I haven't seen any more results. All that we know so far is that the calls were made. People were claiming to be, they were impersonating officers of Elections Canada and telling people to go vote somewhere else. And it was coming from the Conservatives. And that part is clear so far. The rest we don't know.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I didn't ask.